Recording in progress.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We have our last session for today, titled "Safe Environment and Justice: The Fate of the detainees forcibly disappeared and kidnapped as foundation of safe environment." Yes, please, Haya, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone. My name is Haya Atasi. I am the Media and Communications Manager at the Syrian Association for Citizens' Dignity. I know it's the end of the day. I know we're tired, but I really hope that our discussion is going to be fruitful. This morning we listened to Mr. Osama Othman, who's the chairman of the Caesar Files Group, who thoroughly described the plight of Syrian detainees in Assad detentions. The photos that we saw were a painful and bitter reminder of the fate of Syrian detainees. And we know for a fact that every returnee to Syria is a potential detainee. And this puts the issue of Syrian detainees at the heart of any talks on establishing a safe environment in Syria. And we know that the Syrian regime has for years utilized the judicial institution to serve itself. It politicized it and used it to prosecute everyone who participated in the popular movements against it. Tens of thousands of innocent people are still being detained under torture, while arbitrary arrests and forced disappearances are still being used by the Syrian regime on a daily basis. This is one of the greatest obstacles to a safe and dignified return to Syria. But prior to any return, a set of legal corrections and measures must also be immediately enforced as part of a genuine general amnesty to regulate the legal and security situation of hundreds of thousands of Syrians who have been unlawfully and illegally persecuted and targeted by the Syrian regime and any other future Syrian state. This general amnesty must require the appropriate guarantees and monitoring mechanisms to oversee its complete execution. The Syrian regime has rolled out a number of false amnesties over the last few years for political and public relations purposes. Therefore, the success of any proposed amnesty would be the first meaningful set of true confidence-building measures to signal to the Syrian people the serious commitment of the states backing the political process and the implementation of a safe environment for all Syrians. As such, this session will address the crucial importance of the issue of detainees and general amnesty as part of the political agreement on safe environment as a key precondition for any possibility of a safe and dignified return for displaced Syrians. I'd like first to introduce my panelists. We have with us here Mr. Fadl Abdelghani, who is the chairman and founder of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. Mr. Riyad Alvar, who is a human rights defender and a co-founder for the Association of Detainees and Missing Ones in Sednaya Prison. Ms. Celia Abersold, who is a Swiss lawyer and legal advisor to the Free Syrian Lawyers Association. Mr. Mazen Gharibi, who is the executive director of the Syrian British Consortium. And finally, Mr. Osama Othman, who is the chairman of the Caesar Files Group. Fadl, if you're ready, I'd like to start with you. So we all know that the Syrian Network for Human Rights is one of the most credible and trusted institutions that documents violations in Syria. And therefore, I would like to start with you to describe to us the reality in Syria. And here by reality, I mean, what is life like right now in Syria?
مساء الخير وشكرا جزيلا.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you for the SADC as a CD and for the the European Institute for Peace. I will start by showing a presentation. I don't know whether it is available here. Osama, is the presentation ready? So I will start with some other points until we can open the presentation. Because today the Guardian has published a report by the Syrian Network for Human Rights on the amnesty decree. I wanted to present part of this report because we have considered 21 amnesty decrees. And we have considered the results of such amnesty decrees.
اوكي هلا البيئة
The safe environment all the legal authorities, and we have worked with Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, have focused on the sufferings of the returnees and displaced persons. But the counter argument, our argument, is that we want to see what are the suffering and what the detainees are subjected to upon their return. This is the environment. If a refugee would return to Syria, he would be faced with all these conditions. And we, for example, we don't know whether he is a returnee or a detainee. Is he a displaced person, or is he living originally in Syria? And that is why we have registered some statistics since 2014, as we started to document some cases, because as of 2014, some cases of return took place. But under some pressures, some people have to return. So this is what we call as forced return. Uh, 10 days ago, I met with the Lebanese Minister of Immigration, and he told me that Lebanon has not endorsed the 1951 convention. Yes, I told him that this has nothing to do with whether you have endorsed or not the agreement or the convention. So, since 2014, up till now, we registered 3,100 cases of returnees. And returnees and displaced persons who returned. So 1,800 did not. And this have been forcibly recruited. And the forced recruitment is a clear violation of human rights, because the army is involved in war crimes already. So part of those who were released. There are 900 persons who have completely disappeared. We don't know anything about them. And so 1/3 of the cases have disappeared. This is frightening. And actually we are faced with great difficulties to know the reasons and the conditions and the case itself. This is the first point. The second point is the violations perpetrated by the regime under the battles, and they have decreased the arbitrary detention, and I still don't know whether I have received the email. I want to show you some statistics that these cases are accumulated and they're still existing. And up till now, the majority of those cases are cases of war crimes, of torture, cases of torture. It's the worst case in the whole world when it comes to violation of human rights. So there is no safe environment under the current conditions. With regard to the report published by The Guardian, during the past years, at the beginning, there were a big number of killings, so we didn't pay attention to the decrees of amnesty, because the amount of killings and shellings was tremendous. But when these military operations have decreased, we started to follow those amnesty decrees, including the last decree that was the reason for so many debates. And our network, the Syrian Network for Human Rights, is the only institution that looked into the different cases. We have contacted over 6,000 families. So they released 450. And 7,000 persons among the 136,000 cases. So all this necessitated 130 amnesty decrees. So these are the amnesty decrees that have no importance. And that's why we have analyzed the situation, and we are waiting. I will give you some statistics that will prove this. I have changed my presentation while waiting for the report of The Guardian. I wanted to deal with the legal aspects here. Because actually I don't see any focus by Syrian institutions to put the blame or to hold governments accountable regarding their responsibilities. Even Australia, that is very far, the New Zealand, that's what is being stipulated in the international law. Because the question of refugees should receive the cooperation of all countries to solve it. For example, Lebanon. There is a big number of Syrians that represent 1/3. So it has to be this number has to be redistributed. For example, the U.S., how many refugees have you received? 10,000? So that we have spoken to the U.S. in order to extend their stays, because this is the responsibility of all countries, even Venezuela. Redistribution. We are focusing on Turkey, and they have a bigger number even as compared to Lebanon, but they are quadruple the number of refugees in Europe. So we never talk about the agreement. We have to talk about all aspects. The agreement between Turkey and the European Union. There is a direct violation of the 2016 provisions. All these are legal concepts in the international law, and the term safe areas is a false term. If we consider other areas of the world, we can sit and discuss with the Turkish government. And I even told the Lebanese minister the return of the refugees. Is it up to Lebanon or to Turkey or other countries? This is a decision that is not to be taken by governments, because this could be a violation of the international law. This decision should be adopted by the UNHCR, the UN institutions, and we have Carolina and Matthew at the UNHCR. All these institutions say that Syria is not a safe environment. The Amnesty International and the Human Rights Watch and the Syrian Network for Human Rights are saying the same thing, and you are telling me something different. So this is a violation of the international law. Now, here is the presentation. I told Haya that I should take more time, but she did not accept. She oppressed me. So this is the monthly report, that is issued on a regular basis. It's the second day of every month. There comes this report indicating the number of detainees and number of returnees. And of course, we distribute this to all parties. I will have to be brief because I just want to deal with one, the cumulative part. The cumulative scheme. Because the report shows that the violations are still continuing and they are accumulating, and here we can see the death toll, that those who died as a result of torture. So did it stop? Did the torture stop? Never. This is for 2022. I just want to show you that the violations are still continued. This report, where we are dealing with the cases of detention, it's on the second day of the month. I want to show you this. Every month, we are updating the figures on a daily day, and these are the cases happening or taking place in Syria. And of course, the Syrian regime is the biggest perpetrator of such violations. Just give me one more minute, says the speaker. Rodina is my mediator, and she is the general commander. So this is the annual report on forced disappearances. The number of those who disappeared in each and every governorate, and those detained by Daesh or by the regime. And what I want to say is that violations are continuing at the time when the amnesty decrees are being issued. So I cannot say that they are false. But the prosecution needs proofs and evidence, because we have accurate data. It's not approximate. We cannot talk about killings in an approximative way. And as you can see, one of the disasters that befell upon us, and because there are no databases, so the important thing is credibility. This is the last part.
هذا هو. لأنه طيب، هذا هو المخطط البياني اللي بنشوف بال 2011 عندنا 16,000 حالة اعتقال. هي بنهاية
This shows us the number of forced disappeared, which amounted to 111,000, and those that are exposed to enforced disappearances, let alone the confiscation of properties. And I will not deal with this part relating to properties. I will stop here. I wanted to deal with the amnesty decrees. Thank you.
To move to Mr. Mazen, and building on the discussion on what was mentioned by Fadl, which I think you provided a lot of good context to start this conversation, although it was a bit long, but it was really, really necessary. What are the greatest dangers that Syrian refugees, that will face Syrian refugees if they were forced into a premature and unsafe return to Syria in the current conditions? I know you're going to answer in Arabic. ما هي أكبر المخاطر التي سيواجهها المهاجرون السوريون إذا أجبروا على العودة القسرية في ظل ظروف؟
What are the major dangers if they are forced to return under the conditions? Thank you very much. Before answering your question, I would like to shed some light on one point. We have spoken today about the infrastructure, the logistical challenges, but we would like to add the political challenges. Today, the regime, through interacting with some institutions, it gives the impression that they are welcoming the return, but some host countries, as a result of some conditions, They are trying to politicize this return in order to put some more pressure on the regime. But this is completely wrong. It is in our political interest is to have this return to Syria. If we are speaking of democratic transition, and this might take generations, but this historic moment will come, and there will be a change. So we have to take into account all the political and social factors and be ready for this moment, because the social capital is totally absent, because the generation that can lead this change, they live abroad. So the regime is fully aware of this fact, and they're trying to put all obstacles and impediments against this return. The regime is very comfortable with the demographic composition of the country, so they do not want to give any concessions regarding the return of Syrians. They give you the impression that they are welcoming, but there are some logistical problems, but that's not true. Now, today, why would a dentist work as a delivery person in Lebanon? It could be some economic reasons, but under the total collapse existing in Lebanon, we can still see that the dentist is working as a delivery man. The first reason is the fear of the return and the fear of being detained. I believe that some quarters, they don't understand what is political detention in Syria. I believe that this is the best weapon used by the regime through perpetuating the fear culture, and we were talking the other day about nostalgia, yet we were not fearing the direct killings, but we were fearing the detention. And I assume that most of those attending here have the same fear. Accordingly, we cannot forget that a big number of displaced and refugees is the fear of enforced disappearances or detention. So we are trying to find a mechanism that will facilitate the return according to some measures. What are the measures? First of all, to the total release of detainees, and according to a certain mechanism. And we have seen the humiliation of those families that are trying to find the fate of those detainees. Unfortunately, we don't have any data regarding those who have been released. It's a total chaos, and at least there should have been a systematic approach. So when we come to speak of step for step, we are being told that this is a major step, and that our steps are micro steps. So we all know when it comes to general amnesty, there is a total release of all rights, But when it comes to personal rights, we have seen the security organs in Daraa to have persecution and to claim for their personal rights. So there is a possibility of another wave of detentions for those people. The second point is, in order to create this environment, there should be some guarantees that have been mentioned by Alex. And here I would like to underline some of them. First of all, to consider null and void all the resolutions that have been issued, including the confiscation of properties. Why would I go back if I have no access to my properties? Second, the dissolution of exceptional courts. And we all know that they are politicized, and the law that was issued is not a fair one, and they could give us any pretexts and justification. So this institution, this is political institution called counter-terrorism court, should be completely dissolved. The political detainees are detained and accused of certain crimes. So we have to stop the application of some legal provisions and laws. For example, the penalty for illegal exit out of the country. So we have to stop some laws for a transitional period. And this is one of the basic prerequisites for the creation of a safe environment for the returnees. The last point, these steps might not be sufficient, yet it might be sufficient for those in Lebanon and some neighboring countries where they are living under very poor conditions and security conditions that are very poor, which will encourage those countries for them to return. But those living in Europe, where there are some clear-cut asylum laws, they would say that we're not here without any legal justification. We have the luxury of these asylum laws. Then there are other steps. So the factors, that we could take other steps in the middle, and the midterm and the long term, in order to allow for some political action. For example, I would ask myself, why would I go back to Homs? I want to go back, I want to work, I want to use the expertise I gained throughout the past periods, and in order to convey this expertise, and I can perform and exercise some political action. And this applies to those who are living in Europe. Of course, there are some political compromises, But I still have one last point. When it comes to the detainees, either they are all released or we refuse the mechanisms that are being suggested. We know that any penetration to the files of the detainees, even if it were small, this mechanism is not satisfactory. We still need a lot, but we have to take into account that 1 day for a detainee is a lifetime for us. So we need to give some concessions. We have to satisfy with the small gains. So I want everybody to join this mechanism. It's not the optimal one, but it is the one available. So let's use these opportunities and these openings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to hear from Mr. Riyad, who he himself was a detainee for 21 years, and he was forcibly disappeared for 15 years in Assad prisons. And I think it's worth mentioning that he's not originally Syrian. I mean, I know he's going to talk about it more now. To really understand, I mean, we're always talking about detainees. We hear more of them as in numbers, but I think I want to build on what Mazen said. 1 day for a detainee means something, and I think Riyad here can tell us actually what would a Syrian detainee live in this 1 day. So رح ننتقل هلا للاستاذ رياض يلي هو كان معتقل بسجن صزنايا.
We would listen to Mr. Riyad, who was detained for 21 years, and originally he wasn't Syrian. And as Mazen said, each day for a detainee is worth a lot. So how we could have a look at this nightmare and this experience.
شكرا للمنظمين المؤتمر.
Thank you for the organizers. Thank you for convening me to this meeting. This is an opportunity to talk about the detainment. It is a case I have suffered from, and I'm talking here about the detainees that are held in secret whereabouts. I'm talking about their families, and I'm talking about the released and who are still suffering from their condition because the violations they have endured. Of course, to be detained in Syria is not an easy matter, especially after 2011, and we know that since 2011, and according to what has been said, the circumstances were dire, and no one has lived through such a nightmare in any part of the world. And I would like to mention some cases in Sidnaya, the prison that I was held in. And I would talk about two matters. We were working on the structure of the managing of the prison, as well as the figures about the imprisoned and the released since 2011 till now. And then we saw a figure that was a shock for us, and we thought that we were mistaken, and then we resumed the study of the figures, and we came about the same figure. So since 2011, 35,000 people were imprisoned in Sydney, and only 5,000 of them were released. So where are the 30,000 people? And of course, you are aware of many collective graves. And since 2011, no one has made a study about those collective graves. We were the only ones who took care of this opportunity, and we wanted to know all the causes that were behind this matter. And Bashar al-Assad has said that he was unaware at all of this matter, and we were just asking whom gave the order from the chief of staff till the person who was in charge of killing and torturing the imprisoned. I don't want to speak for a long while about this matter, and I just want to thank my two colleagues, but for a safe return to Syria, here I could ask several questions. How to do this, whereas we have some exceptional tribunals? There is a tribunal which is in charge of the terrorists. And for all the other tribunals, they could make some very weird sentences. And in fact, the people wasn't aware that the judge is not a real one, but just an official in the army, and they were tortured and then killed. These are the martial tribunals for counter-terrorism. And we know that these courts are illegal, and many people don't even know why they are appearing before these courts. And the figures are really increasing. So why are we talking about this subject? In fact, those people are just held accountable for crimes they didn't commit, for stuff they are not aware of. And what about some other places? We know that there are more than 20 places that are created for torturing people, and all this is under the supervision of the army. And you are aware of the region, the region that is relative to voluntary work. And the voluntary work is something that is imposed on some people without being remunerated. And many bodies and dead many bodies were accumulated, and prisoners were compelled to sleep over dead bodies. And of course, I was dreaming of going back to my country, to the countryside, and be under a tree. And of course, we are all lovers of being back to our own country, all of us. Nevertheless, you never stay in a strange or foreign country just because you wanted. For forced detainment, there was a report about the subject, and between 2011 and 2021, there was a network of many lawyers affiliated to the Syrian regime, many officials, many mediators, all of them affiliated to the regime, and they took more than $900 million. And they tried to convince some families that they will relay some good information about the detainees to them. So many people sold their houses, gave all their money just to have some information about their beloved. This is crazy. This is unacceptable. This is illegal. And today in Sidnaya, the prison, each day you spend in this horrible place is equivalent to 1 year, and every second you hear a door being opened, you think that an official is coming, or just an armed man to harm you. And all the armed people were text of being the devil himself, because each devil in this prison would kill at least 5 people. So we have really to solve these problems, and unless these problems are solved, we won't be able to return to our country.
Thank you, Riyad. This was indeed very emotional, at least for me, to listen to it. I think I would move to Mr. Osama Athman, and I'm asking the questions in English and Arabic just to make sure that they're getting the translation correctly. So my question to you, Mr. Osama, we all know that the Caesar Files group was one of the strongest groups that documented and provided evidence on the fate of the detainees and the forcibly disappeared people in Syria. What are the practical steps that have been taken by the international community with regards to the file of the detainees and displaced forcibly disappeared people? Was what they did enough? Did it really match the level of brutality that these people were treated with? So in Arabic, من المعروف أن مجموعة سيزر هي أحد أقوى المجموعات التي وثقت وقدمت أدلة حول مصير المعتقلين من المخفيين قسرا في سوريا. ما هي الخطوات؟
What are the practical measures taken by the international community with regard to this case? And are these steps appropriate or are relative to the amount of torture? Actually, you are asking me my opinion about these measures or these steps taken. There was no steps whatsoever taken. The dealing with the Caesar files was quite shameful. It never received any media coverage, and there have been many mistakes. At the official level, this file did not lead to any practical steps except for what our team has undertaken in terms of prosecuting and taking them to the courts of Europe, especially in Germany. We have submitted this file to the General Prosecutor of Germany. They considered it thoroughly, and they made sure that these photos have been taken in the places we mentioned, and that those who killed those detainees are affiliated to the regime, and it was not some personal mistakes. This is the maximum we have been able to reach. But as for the political level, and here I take the advantage of this forum, because there is some confusion between those who are accounting for the regime. They are confusing between the Caesar law and the Caesar files. Caesar law has been issued by another country, and it is temporary, and it is the subject of political arguments. Yet it has to do, in a little part of it, with the political detainees. And this is why we have named those files by this photographer who was able to bring out these photos. So these are crimes that have been perpetrated by the regime, and they are not subject to prescription. But this man has become an ethical icon, and confusing it with the Caesar law, as if we were living in another world. And of course, this is a common mistake, so I kindly ask all colleagues who are dealing with human rights should be more accurate and to differentiate between the two. The second point I want to deal with is the working on this file cannot wait for other countries to open the door for us. We have to fill all the space and the margins. We have to take advantage of any opening in order to perpetuate these images, and I don't know whether I have responded to all your questions.
So he just mentioned that there was no concrete steps or procedures taken after the release of the Caesar, of the horrible and horrendous photos of that show the level of brutality that the regime treats the Syrian detainees. What can we do to ensure that these perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity are actually held accountable, given the pool of evidence that we currently have?
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the question. The accountability is, of course, a big subject. We can spend evening talking about it, but I would like to point out three specific things that we could do. So first, it is very important that we involve the affected communities, the actual victims, and we don't just engage in accountability discussions or interviews or whatever it is, like online, where you don't have direct contact with the victims. Studies show actually, when you, from previous conflicts in different contexts, that victims, when they are directly involved in the justice processes, no matter what you actually do, they are more satisfied. They feel like there is some sort of justice rendered to them, even if maybe eventually the perpetrator doesn't end up in prison. So it is very important that we directly engage with the victims, and that is, of course, more difficult than it sounds, because now when you speak to Syrians, maybe displaced communities, they are very frustrated about the justice processes. They see the same perpetrators for the last 10 years still walking freely, living good lives in many cases, while they suffer and there is no justice to them. They don't experience justice. So it is very important that we engage them in these conversations and that we explain what has been done so far, because there are efforts going on, like some universal jurisdiction, there are some documentation efforts, etc. But people usually don't know about it. They are not involved in it. It is not a topic a lot of organizations speak to at the grassroots level. So that is the first point that or the first step that we should do. Second, it is very important that we engage in legal documentation of these crimes. We have focused a lot on advocacy documentation in the last 10 years, which is important. We need to raise awareness. We need to speak about the numbers, crimes that have happened, etc. There's a lot of merit to this type of documentation, but in many cases, it doesn't fulfill the standards of admissibility in criminal or even sometimes civil cases. We need to document the stories of these affected people in a way that it meets the admissibility criteria under both Syrian criminal law and international criminal law. Many times when we speak about documentation, now we jump to the Rome Statute. The International Criminal Court should hold these perpetrators accountable. But actually, the International Criminal Court right now doesn't have jurisdiction over Syria. So we need to contemplate the idea that maybe in the future there will be Syrian criminal courts that have jurisdiction over these crimes. And so we need to collect the information right now, even if there are no avenues to bring it, but now the evidence is here. The victims are still alive. We can talk to them, we can collect documents, we can collect their testimonies. But maybe then in the future we are ready to bring them to any avenue that opens up. And the third point is that I want to emphasize, we should, while we document, while we speak to victims, while we do all these efforts, we should focus on quality over quantity. A lot of emphasis now is about the amount of documentation we have, how many terabytes, how many million of videos we have downloaded, etc. But this eventually will not bring us justice, because as long as they don't fulfill the standards of admissibility in Syrian or international criminal law, we cannot use them as evidence. So we need to have proper documentation that fulfills the legal standards, and it's better to have less of it, but done properly, than huge quantity that would eventually not serve justice.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go back to Mazen. You mentioned something about engaging in I'm going to translate to the mechanism of releasing detainees, and you said that you encourage that we become involved and then look at every single opportunity we have to help release these people. What do you think can be done for the fate of the missing and forcibly disappeared people to actually be revealed? What are steps that we can actually do?
هو بالحقيقة أنا كنت عم بحكي على آلية
I was talking about a certain mechanism, a neutral and international mechanism to know the fate of the Syrian detainees. And up to now, the process is starting. First of all, we have to know what to do, because we have to control things, and we don't talk about release. We are talking about their future. And now in Syria, maybe those things would be mixed up. So we have to talk about this, about what is juridical, what are the consequences, what we can do, what we can't do, so we can control things. And I think that some Syrian organizations tried to explain what is Caesar law, what isn't Caesar law. Sometimes the civil society is not present, so we have to exert some lobbying to involve the society's civil society. So it's not something secondary. And my colleagues are aware of this because the consultation with the civil society was really weak, but there is an opportunity to remove this because we have to exert pressures to change the situation. And for the forced disappearance, this concept is and correct me if I am wrong, this concept is unclear and there are no norms, clear norms, and it's very difficult to measure things, but this mechanism would allow us to determine what is forced disappearance, and I'm afraid of politicizing this, and we have to play a role to determine things. So what is forced disappearance? And there are documents about the matter, and we have to know exactly what is forced disappearance in Syria. And we need an access to our data. As Fadil has talked about their data in their web, and we have to encourage all the persons to share the information. I am not protecting this mechanism. What I say is that we have to try to use all we have.
These are some of the steps that we can take. We have to explain this mechanism, and we have to convey it to the detainees and their families so that they can understand what we are capable of doing. I wanted to add 2 points. The mechanism is not yet subject to discussion, and I still don't know whether we will be discussing it or not. Of course, we are supporting the creation of this mechanism because it will be an addition, a valuable addition, and we can learn our lessons from cooperation when we raise the expectations. They can consider that what has been achieved in Europe is a major breakthrough. But this is not gonna be achieved. So the limited jurisdiction, because the Kaplan's ruling is an accusation of the regime. As for the forced disappearances, when these cases are considered as forced disappearances, for example, Amnesty International considers that after the lapse of 1 week, it could be the case could be considered a case of forced disappearance. I just wanted to present to you part of the report, which took us 1 whole year. It defeats the amnesty decrees. I don't know if we can put it on the screen. Can you show it on the screen? It is there on my laptop. I just wanted to show the report is quite long. It's 50 pages long. These are the arguments of each decision or decrees, and these are the number or the figure relating to detainees during before the amnesty decrees comes out. This is the number of enforced disappearances each for every year. For example, those who disappeared in 2011, they're still there. The number of killings have decreased only 60 instead of 400 or 600. This is an accumulation of figures. There are people who were who have disappeared in 2011 and up till now, because this is a disaster if we forget about those who disappeared in 2011. Those who are still under detention, and the number is 13,532. Of course, there are testimonies by people who were released and who benefited from the amnesty decrees. So there is a legal analysis for those amnesty decrees, because this is the job of legislative institutions, but none of them came out of them. Thank you. Mr. Osama Othman, how can we benefit from the Caesar files? We said that there were no practical steps that were taken so far. How can we make use of this Caesar file? We started this work as a documentary work. We had a problem since the 80s. There were 17,000 that disappeared. The impact on the wife, on the, the legal aspects and of the repercussions, because they're not known. And we have, there are so many problems related to inheritance, to houses, to homes, to properties. So when the revolution broke out, we were faced with a similar problem, and that is why we were keen on finding the realities. And we started looking for the perpetrators. When we take the case to a court in Germany, we cannot expect that they will detain Ali Mamlouk. Even we can document the case, and then comes the political investment of such cases. We cannot say that we are prosecuting the regime for these crimes. Some people, they send an email to the Hague court, and they start talking as if they have done what is necessary. No. Actually, there must be a political how to invest and to use these cases. But when it comes to the Syrian society, what did you do? What did you accomplish for them? Nothing. So it's either the regime is very strong or a criminal. So we do not need to exaggerate these cases. The regime is criminal enough. The second point I want to underline, we can take them to court. This is not enough. The bodies that you have seen, the cases of torture, the perpetrator is not Bashar al-Assad, but he is just a small soldier. But he has a full mandate to do whatever he wants. So when we say that this is no one and we're not going to take him to court, but they are killing and perpetrating these crimes under the name of Assad. So we have to document the names of those persons in order for them to feel that they will be prosecuted one day. These criminals are in tens of thousands. They have families, they have children, they have properties. So how could we achieve social peace and coherence if we are not able today to present those testimonies? Thank you.
Syria must include for it to be actually effective.
Thank you. Let me maybe push back a little bit on the idea of the general amnesty. Of course, the release of the detainees is very important, but we have had 24 or 25 amnesties so far, and none of them really had the effect. Even the last one that was kind of celebrated a little bit for being the most comprehensive amnesty didn't lead to the release of all the detainees. So why would now amnesty number 26, or how many we have had, be different? There is simply, we have heard it also from multiple panelists today, like there is no credibility to these amnesties right now, as they have been adopted. Also, like in some situations, they might even be counterproductive because we are demanding this amnesty, but at the same time, the system is still the same. It's still the same regime, the same practices of arbitrarily arresting people, the same detention conditions. There is no guarantee that if we demand the release and the detainees are actually released today, that they are not re-arrested tomorrow, because all the same structure is still in place. So we need to maybe change our perspective a little bit on these amnesties, and we should advocate for a more comprehensive approach. We should first address what leads to the detention, namely the practice of arbitrary arrest. We should then also talk about like request all the information that is related to the detention, like how many people are in detention, where are the detention facilities. There is practice of secret detention facilities. We don't know anything about these people. We don't know where are these places. We don't have records of detainees. So without this information, we cannot ensure that when there is general or comprehensive amnesty, that actually, and the regime is releasing people, we don't even know if they are releasing all the detainees from all the detention facilities that exist. So we first need to request this information, I think, before we advocate or before we go into the general amnesty law. And even also there are detainees or people detained currently with armed groups. When we adopt this general amnesty, these people will not be included because we're talking mostly about the political prisoner in the regime facilities. But still, there are many families suffering because they lost their loved ones to armed group detention. So we should also look at what these people are doing. For example, right now there are thousands of allegedly former ISIS fighters and their families being detained in northeastern Syria, and nothing is being done. Western governments are not repatriating their citizens, so we should also work on that front and pressure the Western governments to take their citizens home and ensure them a fair trial in their home countries. Yes, so as I said, like, we should not only focus on adopting the amnesty and discussing the conditions of the amnesty, but we should move to a comprehensive approach to work also with lawyers to help the detainees right now, their families, to get as much information as we can, collect this information, then with more data, we can work on a release and comprehensive amnesty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now open the floor for a few questions. Osama, yes or no? Okay. Can you start with Dr. Nazim because he asked?
أشار الأخ فضل
Our brother Fadl has mentioned in his report that the regime releases on the one hand but detains on the other. And the release of any information on one detainee is a real gain. But if we do not engage in a complete solution for our problems, then we will be drowning in very small and tiny details. I believe that we should focus and emphasize on the creation of a safe environment so that we could benefit and make use of all your documents, your investigations, and all the data available. We have to engage positively to create a safe environment, and in order to avoid these daily disasters. Thank you.
نخفض سقف التوقعات ولا
The level of expectations, by way of commenting on what has been said, we have to confront the families while focusing on the achievement of justice, because there are many attempts to stop any political process. And we have to hold the regime accountable. As for the creation of a new mechanism, we entered into negotiations with the Commission. And we said that the detainees in Syria deserve a special mechanism after all the torture they've been exposed to, their taking into account their numbers. And we said that we will share all the data and the statistics we have for proper investigation. But what we are calling upon the international community to do, to give prerogatives in order to investigate this. Investigations take a major effort. So we want to have a UN mechanism that gives them new mandates in order to discover and to reach the weight. And this will put pressure on the authorities. The victims are not supposed to be going and to tell but there should be pressure on the authorities in order to give out the names of detainees or where they have been buried. And although we know that they have, those people have been issued death certificates for the wrong reasons. So we have to lower the level of expectations, but this, because this has happened in many parts of the world, including Syria, when they sent the inspection missions on the chemical weapons. Why don't they take the same measure in order to have access to secret and public prisons? So the group of friends of Syria should focus their efforts in order to know the fate of those detainees. We have to know what is the result, especially that these are the big powers who adopted this committee that inspected the presence of chemical weapons. And here I would like to add that we have to call and to demand for an accurate description. It's not an internal armed conflict. And Mr. Samir Taki said this morning that the Red Cross can have access to the country without any permission, but not to be described as an internal conflict. And even if it was described as an international armed conflict, that they will then be able to have access to prisons. And they could tell the regime that this is to be governed by the international law. Thank you.
أستاذ سمير بعدين أستاذ محمد.
شكرا جزيلا. وأنا
Thank you very much. I would like to express an immense happiness to hear those young men, and I am certain that Syria will never die. Of course, there is hypocrisy in the international community. When they want to do something for Ukraine, immediately a Security Council resolution was adopted, or the General Assembly resolution was adopted. So we have to launch a campaign to uncover all these reports. Because at a certain point, the US and Europeans decided to give a deaf ear to what's happening in Syria. So this has to be changed. Political persistence. In 1 minute, Ukraine, the Ukraine resolution was issued. So this what has to happen. If we launch a legal campaign to the United Nations, but the political process led by Peterson is on a track, but from a practical point of view, there is a law. The security organs are killing according to Law 29. Even the laws that created those organs, it gives them the right to claim those lives. There are a number of laws that were issued, and as a matter of fact, I was a member of the Hariri tribunal team. In principle, when the United Nations wanted to get into his bedroom, they did without any word. So there should be further effort in this regard. Otherwise, what you have collected in terms of work is tremendous. But we have to have or to give a political weight to all these efforts. When we speak of political detainees, which go back to over 11 years, when the detainee is released, they are still suffering. They are released, but there are some sanctions. He is not allowed to travel abroad. There are other restrictions. So through creating a safe environment, we would be able to have an independent judiciary away from the control of the regime. When we have this, we will be able to achieve justice in Syria. With regard to our expectations of international tribunals, it has to do with major criminals. And this has to be initiated by a legal action at the national level. Thank you.
Is it okay if we take a few more comments? Okay. Let's 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to be over.
شكرا.
Thank you, Mahmoud Sulaiman from Deir al-Zur. And I have many observations, and it's getting late. I wanted to talk about that tomorrow, but I'll try to take this opportunity to speak. Of course, I agree with Mr. Samir. This is a case of an international will, and I think that our presence in Syria is very, very important and necessary because of fears of us asking for our right to return. All we need right now are the guarantees provided by the UN and also by the civil community, the international, community. And for the amnesty decrees, it's better to get a decriminalization of people, because when you talk about an amnesty, you talk about perpetrating crimes. And we know that Bashar al-Assad himself would issue amnesties. And here we're not talking about crimes. People who are involved haven't perpetrated any crime. And when I read what is written, we are asking the Syrian state about doing some things. It's like if we were asking the Syrian regime of doing some things. So, as I am an expert about constitutional law, I would think that the transitional authority would be able to do something. We need a transitional power. We won't talk about conflicts and about giving in. And now we are having a dialogue about the safe environment. And I think that Mr. Fadel would agree with me. Thank you. Thank you. I am from the cultural Kurdish organ in Vienna. I think that the relationship with safe return is starting from the outside, and it's something reversible. And to get to something complementary and integrated, I would say that the return is internal, because there are some displaced persons internally. And in some region which are under the control of al-Assad, we know that minors are kidnapped, and there is a certain ideology that is taught at schools. So there are many violations related to the olive trees and to the personal ownership. So I would ask, what are the realities and how are we reacting with those violations in Syria itself? Ismail Muhammad Yassin from Vienna.
موضوع أول شيء نشكر
At the outset, I would like to thank the speakers for all the rich information we've been provided with. In short, we have to understand the mentality of the regime. The regime is feeling comfortable today. They have representatives at the Security Council. At the Security Council, they have China, they have Russia. So the regime is not keen on giving out figures about the detainees and enforced disappearances and missed ones. So the regime, why would the regime give such concessions at the time when they are having this support? Even with regard to Turkey, they are telling the regime, please take your folks because I have elections and I have to pay attention to my internal and domestic conditions. The Syrians in Turkey are not comfortable. In Jordan, which is a small country, they have 1.5 million. As compared to the Turkish economy, we will find a big difference. There is in the northern part of Iraq also there are 500,000. And I was speaking to the NHCR. The Iraq government is being very generous with regard to the refugees. So, in my opinion, what did the National Coalition do? Of course, the Syrian heroes abroad are playing a major role and they're doing a great job, but we have to revise what we are doing ourselves. We have to come out of this black box. You know that the regime is governed by security doctrines that are completely closed. So, at the international forum, at the European Union, the United States, the UN, we have to press for implementing these decisions, but we have to reconsider and review what we have accomplished. Thank you.
بس بالاختصار.
Who would start? All the questions were directed to me, and no one asked you questions. Mazen has started a conversation about some benefits that we could that a detainee could benefit from being released even one day before it was decided to do so for him. And for the detainees, they were kidnapped in the first stand. And we are starting to explain this situation. This is abusive detainment. And Mr. Yasser said that we should hold accountable the persons involved in this. And then the regime, if the regime changes his mind and release 30,000, what about the 10,000 or the 10 or the 100,000 held in arbitrary detention? What about those held in prisons? And in each report, there is always one message, not more. As for the mechanism, there are a mix-up. Sometimes people think that the United States have some statements, but we rely only on data, and there are mixed up concerning the Red Cross and many other organs. There are two laws in Syria, the human rights law and the humanitarian law. And of course, we won't talk about this. In fact, there is an internal conflict, armed conflict in Syria, and there is an international conflict. And we know that the security organs are committing misdeeds, and there are some force majeure orders. And in fact, the law is stronger than the force majeure orders. And there are no laws who would allow torture and who would prevent accountability. So we have to take care of these things. And each court and each elections, we have to dismember all those things. And I think that we have a responsibility on this matter.
I do agree that we have high expectations. I'm not a politician, so don't put any pressure on us. We are not. We won't accept any pressures because we are calling for compensation, for holding them accountable for the crimes against humanity. I just need to answer one more question. Actually, any recommendation should be adopted by either the UN, by the international community, by the UNSCR. And some organizations are using the government, the Syrian government. I have 8 resolutions adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations, and they mentioned the English regime, the Syrian regime. So there are some royalists, they're royalist, more royalist than the king. At the beginning, there are many other points, but when it comes to dealing with the mechanism, doesn't mean that we stop demanding or our demands. When they release one detainee, we should ask them, what about the 199 others? So we should ask for the maximum, yet I fear that we cast our suspicions without thinking of the repercussions. So this is what I fear. So we should have learned from the Geneva process, because at the beginning we didn't want to join, yet we are now repeating the same thing as mentioned by Dr. Mazen. I fully agree with you, Dr. Mazen, that the Safe Environment Project is fundamental. But I'm just hesitant about the complete solution. We can suggest several solutions from different perspectives, and then, but if we speak of a complete solution, I don't think it exists. Even the Dayton Agreement didn't speak of a complete solution. I fully agree that we have to focus on the creation of a safe environment. We have to accept more than one solution, and there should be complementarity among all these solutions. At least our generation should not stand in the way. Our role, we should be more open on everything that is being submitted. We should cooperate with each other in order to avoid falling into the mistakes made by the previous generation, which we are paying a high price for. This mechanism could fail, big failure. So we should not, this doesn't mean that we should raise our level of expectations.
بعتقد ما بعرف إذا حدا بحب
I don't know whether you want to add something.
أنا بس بدي أحكي عن
I would comment on the mechanism that was evoked by our colleague is a mechanism related to victims. We were there from the start, and we worked on it for some humanitarian goals. And as Mr. Mazen said, we wanted to help all mothers, all victim mothers, and we wanted to help the families. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone, and would like to meet you tomorrow. Thank you.
Recording stopped.